Sometimes, especially in the dead of night, when the silence seems viscous like honey, and every shadow on the wall begins to live its own life, I mentally return to that morning that forever changed everything that was ever dear to me, not because I want to, no, rather because this memory lives inside me like an unhealing wound, like a breath that cannot be held back. I was only 6, but on that spring day when my father died, I seemed to understand for the first time that the world can be cruel and unpredictable. The sun then poured through the windows with generous rays, it smelled of vanilla and dough, and Dad, so alive, so dear, cooked his signature pancakes, with faces, with smiles, as he himself liked to say, so that the day begins with laughter. I remember well how I ran into the kitchen, my hair flying, my bare feet stomping on the wooden floor, how I laughed when he turned to me with a spatula in his hand, like a sorcerer's wand, and shouted in a cheerful voice, "Aurora, my beautiful princess, come on, your old dad can't cope without you." At that moment, my mother was setting the table, humming that very melody that later disappeared from my memory, as if someone had erased it. Everything seemed so ordinary, so kind, and into this serenity burst something that forever left a void in my life. The spatula fell, hitting the tiles with a loud bang, and my dad suddenly seemed to bend in half, clutching his chest, and his face twisted in pain so that I became scared, truly scared, for the first time in my life. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. Then there were the screams, my mother's frightened voice, the call for an ambulance, the smell of medicine in the air, the bright light of the hospital lamps that pressed on my eyes, and her sobs, muffled, tortured, endless. It all merged into one solid spot, gray and sticky, like a shadow that you can't brush away. The house became different after that, not just empty, but silent, as if it itself had lost its voice. The rooms that used to ring with laughter were filled with silence that cut the ear, and my mother's footsteps echoed along the corridors, as if she were wandering in a labyrinth from which she could not escape. She cried a lot at first, but soon her tears gave way to restraint, and then David appeared in her life, tall, with a soft smile and a voice that at first made me feel a little better. He did not try to replace my father, and maybe that was what made his presence bearable. Mom met him at some gathering of people who had lost loved ones. I found out about this later, when I overheard their conversation on the veranda. A year later, he came to live with us, and although I tried not to show it, I still hoped that one day Dad would walk through the door and say that it was all a mistake, that he was just late, that I just had to wait a little longer. I tried to get used to David. He was not bad, on the contrary, he was attentive, kind, sometimes even funny, but Mom increasingly seemed distant, as if she were in some other dimension, and this detachment reached its apogee when she announced that she was pregnant. "You will be an older sister," she said with such joy, with such shining hope in her eyes, that I felt as if I had been pushed somewhere far away, behind the scenes of this new life, where from now on I was assigned only the role of an observer. Mateo's birth was more than just an event, it was a turning point. From then on, everything revolved around him like the sun, and my mother, who had previously been so focused and attentive, suddenly became the woman who couldn't remember if she'd left my lunch in my backpack or if I'd done my homework. Every time I came home with an empty stomach and tried to tell her that I hadn't eaten again, she'd just smile at me and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, honey, I just had a doctor's appointment today." I heard it so often that I stopped answering. David noticed all of this. I'd see him looking at me across the kitchen table when my mother leaned over to blow dust off Mateo. Forgetting that she had another child, he'd come up to me while I was doing my homework and say, "Sometimes people get so caught up in one thing, Aurora, that they forget about everything else." These words stayed with me like a talisman, and they contained more care than any of my mother's stock phrases. It only got harder with each passing year. David tried to talk to Mom. I heard them talking. I heard him say that Mateo needed more independence, that he couldn't be behind his back all the time, and Mom seemed to go deaf. Her face would tighten, her lips would press into a thin line, and it would all end the same way. She would accuse David of indifference, of loving the wrong child. It seemed to me that with each such conversation, something inside David would die, as if he were giving in, but only halfway, because despite this, he continued to be with me. When Mom refused the offer to enroll Mateo in a baseball section, making a scandal about injuries and dangers, and then enrolled Him in an art club, from which he ran away after 3 classes. I was not surprised. Everything went in a circle. Mateo did not know refusal, he did not know responsibility, and I knew too much, and when my mother said to me again, "Aurora, be a sweetheart, clean Mateo's room," I just got up and went, because I knew that otherwise it would all end in tears, just not mine. But that day David intervened, and then for the first time I saw him lose his temper. His voice was hard, cold as ice. "She is not his servant." And my mother began to cry again. She screamed, accusing him of loving me more than Mateo. I understood then that in our house there were not feelings, but complaints, not love, but a constant balance between guilt and expectation. David no longer argued. But he did not leave, he stayed next to me, and this was his truth. And so it went on. My high school graduation was a bittersweet memory that I still can't recall without a slight shudder somewhere inside. Deep in my chest, I stood there in my gown and square cap, with a stupid and all too grown-up feeling of nostalgia, not having yet lived a single day of truly adult life, and slid my gaze over the crowd, hoping to meet him, David, the man who, despite everything, stayed close and did not let me completely disappear into someone else's house. And when I finally saw him, standing at the very edge, with genuine pride and warmth reflected on his face, I felt that all this, the sleepless nights, the struggle for attention, the silence between me and my mother, was worth going through at least for that look. Mom was there, of course. She came, not to say she didn't come, standing at a distance, her finger endlessly sliding across the screen of her phone, buried in a text message, probably with the nanny who was looking after Mateo at the time. Because he was stressed from being away from home, as she would later say, as if making an excuse. Later that evening, when the celebration was over and the silence had returned to the walls of our house, David called me into his office, the same one that smelled of books and leather, where I had once hidden from the world. He handed me a thick folder, and when I opened it, I saw university brochures, neatly arranged by category, by state, by program, by opportunity. "I saved," he said, looking straight into my eyes, with that serious gentleness that always distinguished him. "You can study wherever you want, the sky is the limit." And just when I, stunned and grateful, was about to say something, my mother flew into the room like a whirlwind, and the air immediately became thick and heavy. "Are you crazy?" she screamed. "This money should be for Mateo's future. He needs it more." David paused for a second, as if giving himself time to collect himself, and then his face turned stony, his voice even and sharp. "This is not up for discussion, Sarah. I have already made my decision. I chose Marshall University in West Virginia, not because it was the most prestigious, but because it was far enough from home for me to breathe, and close enough to return to if I suddenly needed to." On the day of the move, my mother did not go with me. Mateo, as she said through a sigh, had developed separation anxiety. He, you see, could not bear the thought of his sister leaving. I left alone, with David, and there was something symbolic about it. He was taking me to a new life, to my adulthood, which I could finally build on my own terms. Life at college was liberating. For the first time I felt like I could be myself, without constantly looking over my shoulder, without having to earn love, without feeling like I had to be a shadow so as not to interfere with the light falling on someone else. I called home every week, but I spoke mostly to David. My mother was always busy. Mateo, as always, demanding all her attention. "Your brother is going through a difficult time," David would say in a tired voice, in which there was more helplessness than irritation. "He got involved with some group. I tried to offer him classes, but your mother, let me guess," I interrupted. "She said that you were too harsh?" "Exactly, she called me a tyrant for suggesting a routine. He says he's too sensitive for that." With each passing year, my visits home became less frequent, because each time I encountered the same picture: Mateo, absorbed in his games, with a closed face and irritated movements, barely acknowledging my presence, and my mother still defending him. "He's not in the mood, he's having a hard day, he needs space," and all this was said in a tone as if I were an uninvited guest and not an older sister. David seemed increasingly exhausted, was increasingly silent at dinner, and although he still supported me, I felt that he, like me, was tired of struggling alone. By the age of 27, I had saved enough to make a down payment on an apartment, a one-room apartment, but bright, cozy, in a good area, with windows through which the sun poured in the morning, just like in the kitchen as a child. The day I received the keys was a moment of triumph for me. a confirmation that I had made it, despite everything. I called home, excited, "You all have to come. I'm throwing a housewarming party. David, I'll make you lasagna, remember?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world, baby," he replied with such warmth that I wanted to cry. My mother intervened. "Oh, honey, I don't think we can. Mateo has plans." "What plans?" I asked, feeling something tighten inside. "Very important ones," she replied dryly. The sounds of another video game blared in the background. Only David showed up on the day of the housewarming. He brought a green potted plant and a bottle of red wine as a gift, and when he said, "Your mother sends love," we both knew it was a lie, a convenient one. Like so many others in our family, over dinner, he told me the truth. Mateo, now 20, had never gone to college, spending his days in front of a screen, sometimes with friends, mostly with alcohol, without goals, without a plan. David offered me a job at his construction company. "In the most basic position, you have to start somewhere," he explained, but my mother intervened again. "That's beneath him, too smart to work, but not smart enough to live off others," I muttered, and David smiled sadly. "I'm still trying, Aurora, I swear I haven't given up." That was our last real conversation. 2 years later, I got a call that David had a heart attack, a massive one, like my father. By the time I rushed to the hospital, he was gone. The funeral was like a dream, tasteless, garish, unbearably false. Mom made a scene, tears, speeches, praise. He was such a wonderful husband. How will we live without him now? I looked at her and saw not grief, but fear of losing convenience, comfort, cash flow. Her tears were not about a person, but about her own situation. Mateo didn't even pretend. He came in wrinkled clothes, holding a phone in his hands, and didn't tear himself away from the screen during the entire ceremony. Mom stood up for me again. "He's worried in his own way," and I stood at David's grave, feeling the old shadows rising again. Everything was repeating itself, only now I was an adult, and I saw it all to the end. A year after David's death, I had almost stopped talking to my mother and Mateo, because in every conversation I felt the same emptiness as I had felt at the funeral. As if there were no longer any threads or bridges or even shared pain between us, only the long shadows of the past that continued to stir on the periphery of my consciousness, exhausting me more than any loneliness. All I knew about them now came from Aunt Lily, my mother's younger sister, who called from time to time, as if out of a sense of duty, and always with a kind of ingrained weariness in her voice, as if she herself were already tired of this endless drama. "They're still holding on to David's savings," she said in one of these conversations. "Your mother recently sold his Chevrolet. Before that, the tools from his workshop. Everything is slowly slipping away." I listened to her, clutching the phone so tightly that my knuckles were turning white, but I tried not to worry. I really did. As if it were possible to learn not to feel guilty for living your life while someone else was slowly destroying the one they had inherited for free. But when one evening the phone screen flashed with a familiar name, Mom, and that same beep I hadn't heard for over a year sounded, my heart still skipped a beat, as if an old, not completely broken mechanism had clicked into action inside me. "Aurora," her voice, when I answered, was weak, dry, as if from another world. "Please, come home." There was something anxious, desperate in her intonation, something that cannot be conveyed in words, but is conveyed by the body, the skin, the breath. I didn't ask any unnecessary questions. I just opened my laptop, found the nearest flight, and without thinking about the price, bought a ticket. When I pulled up to our house, my heart sank. The facade that David always kept in perfect order was overgrown with grass, as if no one had touched it since he was gone. Weeds had taken over everything from the walkway to the porch. The paint was peeling, and the shutters were crooked, as if the house itself had given up and sagged. But what struck me even more was the way my mother looked when she opened the door. Instead of the bright, well-groomed woman whose mirror was always smeared with makeup, there stood a hunched, faded figure with tangled hair through which gray was showing, a face covered in wrinkles, in a dressing gown that looked like it hadn't been changed for days. "Come in," she said, her shoulders hunched, and led me into the living room, where the air was stale and heavy, smelling of dust and old laundry and something else, vaguely alien. The dishes were piled high in the sink, the dust was thick on the surfaces. And all this was such a sharp contrast to the mother who had once made me rewash a plate if there was even a drop of water left on it, that I felt uneasy. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked, sinking down onto the sofa, from which a rusty spring stuck out like a painful reminder that David would have fixed it before it was even visible. She burst into tears almost immediately, as if my presence had become the last line of defense, and, sobbing, barely managing to wipe her face with the edge of her sleeve, she said, "We're running out of money, Aurora. My pension barely covers the bills, and my savings are almost exhausted." I was silent for a long time, looking at the faded wallpaper, because I knew where this conversation was leading and did not want to hear what I already guessed I was going to hear. "And Mateo? Is he helping?" I asked finally, without hope. Almost automatically, her face tightened, as if from physical pain, in a strange mixture of shame and justification that I already knew well. "He's looking for a job, it's just, these employers don't understand him. One wanted him to start at 8 in the morning, and you know, Mateo is not a morning person. The other one offered him physical work, and well, he's too smart for that." I felt my jaw tense, something inside me groan with helplessness. "Mom, at his age, without experience, he can't figure it out," I began, but she immediately interrupted me. Her voice trembled, and that old, shrill note that I had known since childhood cut through it. "You don't understand anything," she screamed, and then suddenly stopped, as if she remembered why I was here, and changed her tone, making it soft, almost plaintive. "Aurora, we need your help. We can't cope without you. It's hard for me to ask, but you've got it so good." I already knew where this was going, and part of me screamed inside, remind her how often she chose Mateo, how she forgot about me, how she pretended that I didn't exist when he called. But I looked at her face, at those trembling hands, at her eyes, in which not only despair but also fear splashed, and, as always, I couldn't. "How much do you need?" I asked quietly. $1,500 a month, she said, barely audible. I almost choked. It was almost a third of my salary, money I was saving for a new car, a trip to Tuscany, an extension of the apartment, but I nodded anyway. "Where is Mateo now?" I asked, already regretting my decision. "At an interview," she said hopefully, "a very promising vacancy in an IT company." But when I glanced out the window, I saw the familiar flickering of the screen in his room, the same flashes, the same dim light, and I realized that some things do not change. I kept my promise. I set up an automatic transfer to my mother's account, and every month, when I saw a debit, I told myself that I was doing the right thing, that this was a duty, that this was help, even if it was to the detriment of my own plans, my own life. I began to come more often, because my mother complained about her health, about dizziness, about fears, and every time I entered the house, I seemed to fall into a frozen past, where nothing moved, where the air was heavy, and even time seemed to pass differently. Mateo was always at home, at the computer, with a beer, with the same look that was even more repulsive than words. "How's the job search going?" I asked. "It's none of your business," he snapped, or simply turned the TV up louder, making it clear that there would be no dialogue. At Christmas, I couldn't stand it. I called in workers and renovated the living room, repapered, painted the ceiling, tidied up the floor, because I knew David wouldn't let the house get to that state. And when my mother twisted her ankle in February, I hired a nurse, canceling the trip I had been planning for so long. I thought that maybe something would change with time, but for now, all I could do was patch up the holes, in the house, in the budget, in the past. And then came a day I will always remember. It was nothing special outside, no thunder, no lightning, not even a lingering rain that might foretell a storm hidden in the everyday, just an ordinary morning, me with groceries, as I had done many times before, lugging heavy bags of vegetables, bread, milk, my mother's favorite cookies, and juice that I knew someone else would drink anyway. I opened the door and froze on the threshold, because what opened up before me was something between a garbage warehouse and the set of a film about the destruction of civilization. Crumpled t-shirts, socks, chip and pizza packages were scattered on the floor. The table was covered with plastic cups and soda cans. Some new scratches were on the walls, and on the sofa, sprawled out at ease, lay a woman whom I saw for the first time, but recognized at first glance, all in glossy clothes, with artificial nails, in a provocative top through which a bra was visible, with a heavy layer of makeup peeling off on her cheeks. "Who are you?" I asked, although I guessed, because internally I was already prepared for the fact that the house that I once considered mine had finally ceased to be mine. Mateo came around the corner, his bangs falling over his eyes and his gait lazily, scratching his neck and yawning. "This is Serena," he said without a trace of embarrassment, "my fiancée. She lives here now." Serena didn't look up, only loudly popped her pink gum and, without asking permission, reached into the grocery bag, pulling out a box of those very expensive cookies that I had bought especially for my mother. "Nice to meet you," I muttered, although words of a completely different caliber were on the tip of my tongue. Later, alone with my mother, I asked the question that was bursting out like air from a burst balloon. "Mom, is this serious? She lives here?" "Oh, Aurora," she perked up, as if the conversation was about something bright and festive. "Isn't it wonderful?" Mateo had finally settled down. Serena has a very good influence on him. He hasn't been drinking with those terrible friends for a long time, because now she drinks my imported beer, I said to myself, remembering the bottles in the trash, but I didn't say anything out loud. "He's even looking for a job," Mom continued, shining with that special light that I thought she always saved just for him. "Serena's cousin has connections at some startup. Mateo says this could be his breakthrough." I just nodded, not wanting to reread the same play with a predictable ending for the 100th time. These breakthroughs happened with frightening regularity. Each of them was the beginning of a great future that ended with empty cans on the floor and written off credit cards in my mother's dresser drawer. My next visit began, as always, with heavy bags and a slight, almost unconscious hope that something had changed, but when I opened the door, it all became clear without words. The house looked like a hurricane had swept through it, the same chaos, the same smell of stale food and cigarettes, a mountain of unwashed dishes, food boxes, and empty bottles on every corner. Serena was lying on the couch again, glued to her phone, her nails tapping the screen like claws on glass. "You live here for free, you eat food that I pay for," I said, holding back the irritation that was rising like a tide. "You could at least wash the dishes." She looked up slowly, her heavily painted lips twisting into a smirk that had everything: disdain, laziness, superiority. "Who are you to give me orders here? This isn't your house at all. I grew up here," I snapped, "and you're just a guest." And then she laughed, harshly, roughly, with a triumphant note, as if she knew she was about to say something that would make me cringe. "Oh, dear, you're clearly confused. The house belongs to Mateo now. Your mother signed everything over to him. There's a will and everything." I went into the kitchen, where my mother was shuffling her never-used coupons, as usual, arranging them in piles as if that were some kind of consolation. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice shaking but cold. "You really signed the house over to Mateo?" She didn't look at me right away. She fiddled with the papers, trying to look busy while I stood there, feeling my insides sink. Then she straightened up, as if she had gathered her courage, and her face became firm. "Yes, it's true. I don't understand," I whispered. "I'm the one helping you. I send you money every month. And Mateo? He doesn't do anything, doesn't work." "Don't you dare talk about your brother like that," she cried, and her voice was the same one she had used to yell at me for breaking a cup or giving me a bad grade. "You don't understand anything. You never understood him." "What do I mean? That he's a parasite? That he can comfortably sit on my neck while his girlfriend destroys our house?" "Stop dramatizing," she said, her lips twisted into an evil grin, and in that face I suddenly saw not a mother, but some embittered woman to whom I had become a burden. "Do you want to know the truth? I never loved you the way I love Mateo. He's better than you in everything, and I don't want you to come back here." These words weren't just an insult, they were a blade, thin, cold, piercing straight into the heart, and everything that I had tried to explain, justify, overcome for so many years collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards. I turned around and walked out, and behind me I heard Serena's victorious laughter, ringing, impudent, triumphant, like a spit in the face. For 21 years, I hoped, believed, looked for hidden love in my mother's actions, thought that she simply didn't know how to show it, that someday she would change, see, understand. It all ended with a quiet, almost everyday click of a closing door. On the way home, I didn't remember anything, not the 4-hour drive along the highway, not the motels outside the window, not how I went up to my floor, how I threw my shoes off by the door, how I sank onto the couch, but I remember opening the bank app. That very transfer was flashing on the screen, an automatic payment to my mother, $1,500 a month, every month, without delay. I looked at the screen for a long time, as if my life depended on it. Then I pressed cancel the regular payment, and at that moment there was silence, such a silence as I had not heard for a very long time. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work, with the kind of focus and tenacity that comes not from a desire to succeed but from a need to survive, to build a new frame of reference where you are no longer torn apart by other people's opinions, other people's love, other people's expectations, where you can breathe without the constant feeling of guilt, like mold eating into your skin. And suddenly, the hole in my budget left by the cancelled transfers no longer seemed like a problem. It became an opportunity, a window into a world where my own well-being was finally being given the right to exist. I opened the tab with my financial plans again, began to study investment vehicles, cautiously but enthusiastically, like a child who believes he can learn to fly. I began saving again, not just for something practical like new furniture or a vacation, for a real home, a home that I would one day walk into, closing the door behind me, knowing that no one has rights to it but me. A place where it will be quiet, light, clean, where no one will demand, manipulate, or blame, a place that will be mine. Exactly a month after the last visit, one Monday evening, when the day was already drawing to a close, and I was sitting at my laptop, checking reports and sipping cinnamon tea, the phone rang. The screen showed one named Mom. I was not surprised, I knew that this would happen sooner or later. The money hasn't arrived, she said immediately, without a greeting, without how are you, without even a hint of care or interest, as if I were not a person, but an ATM that had suddenly run out of cash. That's right, I answered, surprised at how calm my voice sounded, as if this phrase had been waiting for its moment for a long time. I cancelled the transfers. A long pause hung between us, and I could almost hear her sitting up in her chair, her voice tightening, her resentment boiling over and spilling out. What have you done? How dare you? After everything I've done for you? I laughed, a real, live laugh, not angry, but released, as if all the tension I'd built up over the years had suddenly leaked out. Everything you've done for me? What exactly? Forgetfulness? Becoming Mateo's maid? Or maybe the way you said you never loved me? That's different. She cried. I was angry. I wasn't thinking. But you can't just stop helping. We were counting on that money. Mateo and Serena are going on vacation, to Cancun. Vacation? I asked, feeling my voice rising. Mateo is going on vacation from what? From video games? From beer? You know, Mom, Mateo doesn't need a vacation, he needs a job. Don't you dare talk about your brother like that. She screamed, and her voice was the same one she used to shout at David when he tried to reason with her. You're just jealous because you left everything to him? I interrupted. Great, you made a choice, now let him take care of you. You're ungrateful, corrupt, heartless. She screamed, and the stream began, endless, angry, hysterical, with accusations, threats, curses, shifting the blame for everything, for fatigue, for poverty, for loneliness. I waited until she finished speaking, without interrupting, just listened, watching her last speech burn. Goodbye, Mom, I said, don't call again, and I hung up. I immediately opened the phone settings and blocked her number. It seemed that everything, the end, but no. In the following weeks, a new wave began, no longer in calls but in messages, online, in every possible digital corner. On Facebook, she posted plaintive posts about how hard it was for her alone, how ungrateful her children were, how she had sacrificed everything just to give them a better future. On Instagram, she wrote comments under my photos. Terrible daughter, selfish, mother's heart killer. Letters arrived by email, long, dramatic, describing the sacrifices she had supposedly made for me, starting with the birth and ending with the concession in the form of my higher education, which, let me remind you, David had paid for. Even Mateo joined in. His messages were angrier, ruder, almost threatening. Mom is crying because of you, either you start paying again, or, here's an idea. I answered briefly, find a job, and I blocked him, too. Then it was Serena's turn. She found me on LinkedIn, wrote a long message full of cliches, seasoned with false concern and caustic reproaches. You're breaking a mother's heart, Aurora, how can you? Mateo is too sensitive to work now, he needs peace, support, we were all counting on you. I almost admired her ingenuity, It's not every day you read that an able-bodied adult man is too sensitive to be employed. 6 months have passed, I don't know how they're doing, and, for the first time in my life, I really don't care. Maybe they've finally realized that Mateo should provide for himself, maybe they're now looking for a new sponsor. An aunt, a neighbor, the state, or maybe they're still waiting for me to give in, to break down, to turn on automatic payments again, to open the door again, to walk in, to put down the bags of groceries, to clear away the dishes, to stroke my mother's head, to offer my brother a job. But no, I won't give in, not anymore. Now those same $1,500 that for years flowed into the black hole of other people's claims are going toward a down payment fund for my own house. I sleep better. I'm no longer woken by reproaches, angry messages, or the guilt that used to keep me in a cage. I know David would be proud of me, he would understand, he would support me. The other day I was driving past a construction site and noticed a sign saying laborers wanted. A thought flashed through my mind, to take a photo, to send to Mateo, but I just smiled and drove on. Their problems are no longer mine. Finally, after all these years, I am free. Write a comment what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.